Some people draw attention when they enter a room. Others blend in, but leave you thinking about what they said long after they're gone. The Sigma INFJ is one of those people. You won't always notice them right away, but once you do, you'll realize they don't think or speak like anyone else. They're rare, quiet, and completely independent in how they move through life. Unlike regular INFJs, who still value some connection to community or shared identity, the Sigma INFJ walks their own path no matter who's around. They're not rebels for show. They're simply wired to think for themselves and protect their space, mentally, emotionally, and socially. But how do you know you're actually talking to a Sigma INFJ? They don't introduce themselves that way. They're not going to explain their type or personality in a conversation. In fact, they usually say less, not more. But there are clear signs, subtle ones, that show up in the way they talk, listen, and carry themselves. You might not notice these things right away, but after a few minutes, or even after the conversation ends, you'll realize there was something different about them. The way they spoke, the way they paused, the way they seemed to know what you meant even when you didn't say it clearly. That's the Sigma INFJ's quiet strength. They use language carefully. They pay attention in ways most people don't. And without trying to stand out, they still leave a strong impression. In this video, we're going to walk through 6 everyday signs that you're talking to a true Sigma INFJ. These aren't obvious or loud behaviors. They're subtle traits that show up naturally, and they say more about who this person is than any label ever could. Let's begin with the first sign. Sign number 1. They observe more than they speak. When you talk to a Sigma INFJ, you might notice something right away. They're not in a hurry to talk. They'll listen carefully, sometimes without interrupting at all. They may nod or give short replies, but for the most part, they're watching. Not in a cold or distant way, but in a deep, intentional way. You can feel them paying attention, not just to your words, but to your tone, your pauses, and even your body language. They don't just hear what you say. They're reading between the lines. They're noticing what you're not saying. And they're building a full picture of what's going on inside you, even if you haven't explained it all. This level of observation doesn't come from being quiet. It comes from training. Over time, Sigma INFJs have developed a habit of collecting emotional and social information before they speak. They want to understand the full truth, not just the surface of the moment. In groups, they usually hang back at first. They let others talk. They notice patterns, moods, and roles. They rarely jump in unless they feel it adds something meaningful. This can make them seem reserved, but it's not about shyness. It's about control. They choose their moments. And when they finally speak, they often shift the whole tone of the conversation. If you're talking to one, you might catch yourself wondering what they're thinking. That's because they're doing more work in their head than they're showing on the outside. They're turning over your words, comparing them with things they've seen before, checking how they feel about it all. And when they finally respond, it's not reactive. It's considered. They don't just reply to your sentence. They reply to your meaning. That's how you know you're not just talking to someone who listens. They observe in silence and speak when it matters. Sign number 2. Their words hit deeper. When a Sigma INFJ finally speaks, you'll notice their words feel different. It's not that they use fancy language. In fact, they usually speak in simple terms. But what they say sticks. Their words carry a kind of quiet weight. That's because they don't speak just to fill the air. They think before they talk. They measure their words, not in a controlling way, but in a respectful one. They understand that words carry energy, and they don't throw that energy around carelessly. You might ask them a question, and they'll pause before answering. That pause is real. It's not hesitation, it's reflection. They're not just thinking about how to answer. They're thinking about what kind of answer fits you, your situation, and the feeling behind the question. Sometimes what they say cuts straight to the core. Not in a sharp or painful way, but in a way that feels true. You might feel seen, even if you didn't give them much to work with. That's their gift. They can pull meaning from small moments and speak to something real inside you. Their tone also matters. Sigma INFJs speak with calm. They don't rush. They don't overpower. And they rarely raise their voice. But somehow, even a short sentence from them can shift how you feel. It might bring clarity. It might bring comfort. Or it might challenge something you've been avoiding. What makes this powerful is that they don't try to impress you. They don't craft their words to sound smart or deep. They just speak from a place of clarity. And that clarity is what makes their words feel like they go further than the surface. If you walk away from a conversation thinking about one thing they said, even if it was small, chances are you just talked to a Sigma INFJ. They don't need to say much to say something that matters. Sign number 3. They ask rare kinds of questions. When most people make conversation, they stay on the surface. They ask about work, hobbies, or recent events. But when you're talking to a Sigma INFJ, the questions feel different. They don't just ask what you're doing. They ask why you're doing it. They don't just want facts, they want meaning. You might be caught off guard by how direct or thoughtful their questions are. It's not about being deep for the sake of sounding smart. It's about getting to the heart of who you are. They might ask, "What made you choose that path?" Or, "When did you start feeling that way?" These aren't questions most people expect in everyday talk. Sometimes the questions feel personal, but never invasive. Sigma INFJs have a way of making you feel safe while still inviting you to open up. It's because they're not judging your answers. They're genuinely curious. They want to understand how your mind works, what shaped you, and what you care about under the surface. They also ask things that reveal patterns. For example, they might say, "Have you noticed this keeps happening?" Or, "Do you think this connects to something from before?" These types of questions show how much they're already paying attention, even if you haven't said much. What makes these questions stand out is how natural they feel. You don't realize right away how unusual they are. But later, you find yourself thinking about them. That's the Sigma INFJ effect. They don't just talk, they shift your thinking without pushing it. You'll know you've met one when a single conversation feels more honest than others you've had all week. They won't ask a long list of personal things. Just 1 or 2 key questions that make you stop and see your own life in a new way. Sign number 4. They stay grounded. When things get tense, emotional, or confusing, most people either react or shut down. But the Sigma INFJ does something different. They stay steady. Their energy doesn't spike. Their voice doesn't shake. They stay grounded, even when emotions are running high. If you're in a difficult or awkward situation with them, you'll notice how calm they remain. They might not have all the answers, but they won't panic. They won't try to fix everything on the spot. Instead, they hold the space. They create a feeling of safety just by being still and focused. This calm presence isn't just personality. It comes from years of internal work. Sigma INFJs know how to manage their emotional reactions. They have practiced sitting with discomfort instead of rushing past it. They have learned how to wait, watch, and respond with intention. In conversation, this means they don't interrupt. They don't push. They give space even when things feel heavy. And if someone gets upset or starts venting, they don't absorb that emotion or try to control it. They hold it with care and keep their balance. People often say things like, "I don't know why, but I feel better after talking to you." That's because the Sigma INFJ's emotional energy doesn't pull others down or push them away. It grounds them. And in today's world, that kind of presence is rare. Even when they're dealing with their own stress, they tend to process it quietly. They don't dump it on others. They deal with it in private, then return to the world with calm and focus. That's part of their strength. They're stable not because life is easy, but because they've built a strong center. You'll know you're talking to one when everything around you feels like it's spinning, but somehow they're still clear and steady. They don't need to control the room. They just need to be themselves, and that's enough to settle the space. Sign number 5. They don't chase connection. Most people, even well-meaning ones, seek validation through connection. They try to keep conversations going, look for signs they're being liked, or adjust their behavior to fit in. But Sigma INFJs don't do that. They show up as they are, and they let others come to them. This doesn't mean they're distant or cold. In fact, they're some of the most emotionally present people you'll ever meet. But they're not needy. They don't try to force bonds. If a connection isn't natural, they don't chase it. If a conversation doesn't flow, they don't fake interest. They know how to stay polite while still keeping their energy protected. When they do connect, it's real. They don't play roles or create false versions of themselves just to make someone feel comfortable. They trust that the right people will recognize them, and if not, they're okay walking away without drama. This creates a quiet power in their conversations. You never feel like they're trying to win you over. You don't feel like they're performing. And because of that, you feel free to be more honest yourself. Their lack of neediness creates space for real connection. They also don't push for closeness. They give people time to open up. They let silence happen if it needs to. And they don't expect emotional exchange to happen quickly. They understand that trust takes time, and they're willing to wait for it instead of forcing it. People who are used to fast or shallow connections might feel confused at first. They might think the Sigma INFJ is distant or uninterested. But over time, they realize something deeper is happening. There's no game, no pressure, just a steady presence waiting for real connection to form naturally. This kind of energy is rare. And when you find it, you know it. You're not being pulled in, you're being welcomed. Quietly. Honestly. Without strings. Sign number 6. They turn talk into meaning. Some people talk to pass time. Others talk to stay comfortable. But Sigma INFJs talk to find meaning. Even when they're discussing everyday topics, they're always looking for something real underneath. They listen for what matters. And when they speak, they often move the conversation towards something more lasting. You might start with a simple topic, like your day or a recent event, but by the end of the talk, you're reflecting on why something made you feel the way it did. Or you're seeing a pattern in your life that you hadn't noticed before. That's what happens when a Sigma INFJ is in the conversation. They don't force depth, but it shows up anyway. This doesn't mean every sentence is heavy. They can laugh, joke, and enjoy light conversation. But they don't stay there for long. Their mind is always scanning for what's beneath the surface. They want to understand why people do what they do, what drives them, and what connects it all together. They're not trying to teach or correct. They're simply trying to understand and help others understand too. So instead of turning the talk toward themselves, they keep asking small but important questions. They build on what was said, helping you think a little deeper each time. It's subtle. They don't change the topic, they guide it. What starts as a casual talk slowly becomes something more personal, more reflective, or more helpful. And often, you don't even notice the shift until the conversation ends. When you leave, you feel like you actually learned something about yourself or about life. That's not a mistake. That's the Sigma INFJ's mind at work, turning ordinary talk into something meaningful without needing to be the center of attention. They do this because they value depth. They respect your story. And most of all, they want each moment, each word to have purpose. The Sigma INFJ doesn't try to be noticed. They don't talk loudly, they don't overshare, and they don't push their views on others. But when you're in a conversation with one, something stands out. The way they listen, the way they speak, the way they shape a quiet moment into something honest and real. We've looked at 6 signs that reveal when you're talking to a true Sigma INFJ. They're not easy to spot at first, but the more time you spend with them, the more you notice their deep awareness, their quiet strength, and their ability to speak with purpose. They don't chase attention. They don't perform. And they never fake connection. Everything they say and do comes from a place of careful thought and honest feeling. That's what makes their presence feel different. If you've ever walked away from a short conversation feeling clearer, calmer, or more understood than usual, you may have just spoken with a Sigma INFJ. These signs may be quiet, but they speak volumes.